This is the strangest thing that's ever happened to me on the road, and I've done that drive more times than I can count. Nothing in this story is supernatural, at least not in the obvious way. I never saw a ghost. Nobody flew, nothing glowed. Everything that happened could be explained if you really wanted to. But the way it felt in the moment, that part is harder to shake. So, anyway, a little background. For almost 3 years, I lived in this small, white farmhouse down a dirt road outside a rural town. On paper, it sounded annoying, but in reality, it was cheap and quiet, and that's what I needed back then. The house was about 30 miles from the town where I worked, and then it was another 5 miles from the highway to my place down this winding dirt road that curved through fields and scrubby trees. My job was nothing crazy. I worked at a hardware store on the edge of town. We sold everything from bolts to chainsaws. During the day, I mostly helped older guys find parts for tractors, loaded bags of cement into pickup trucks, that sort of thing. I also did a lot of the boring back-end stuff, stocking shelves, counting inventory, filling out order forms in the back office. The kind of work that leaves you more tired mentally than physically. Because of that job, I drove that route a lot. Some days I'd do the round trip twice, if I covered an evening shift, or had to swing back into town for something. I've driven that highway in every condition. Clear blue afternoons, freezing rain, snow coming down so hard I could barely see the hood of my car. Same with the dirt road. I knew every bend in that thing. I could tell you where the biggest pothole was, where the ditch gets deep on the right side, where the grass grows a little taller in summer. Not once did it feel creepy to me. It was just the way home. That night started normal. I'd stayed late at the store doing inventory. We did that once every few months, where you have to count everything, match it to the computer, write down all the stuff the computer says you have but you can't find. All that fun. The manager was there, one other guy, and me. We finished up, locked the place, and stood in the parking lot a bit, just talking about nothing. Sports, bills, the usual. By the time I actually got into my car, it was fully dark. Not pitch black, but past the point where there's color in the sky. You know that kind of deep blue that turns into black? If you look away for a second, that stage I wasn't exhausted. Just that kind of end-of-the-day tired where you're ready to be on the couch. My car back then was a dark gray Subaru Forester, late 2000s model, a little beat up but reliable. I'd had it since before I moved out there. The odometer was creeping up close to 190,000 miles, and the check engine light had been on for months. I know that sounds bad, but it was for some sensor I couldn't afford to fix yet. The mechanic in town told me it would run fine as long as I kept up with oil changes, and I did. The gas gauge was a little under half a tank. Dashboard lights were their usual dull orange glow. Radio was on low, just some talk show I wasn't really listening to. I pulled out of the parking lot, hit the main road, and then eventually merged onto the 2-lane highway that would take me most of the way home. The highway at that hour is pretty empty. During the day, you get a mix of commuters and farm trucks. But late at night, it's mostly semis, and a few locals. I remember passing one big truck heading the other direction, and after that, it was just darkness ahead, and my headlights on the asphalt. Fields on both sides, the occasional cluster of trees. Nothing special. I always kept an eye on the clock, more out of habit than anything. I knew from the store to my house was about 40 minutes if I didn't get stuck behind anyone slow. So I did what I always do. I mentally broke the drive into chunks. 10 minutes to the old billboard, another 10 to the turnoff, then 5 miles of dirt. When I reached the turnoff, everything still felt routine. I slowed down, flicked on my blinker even though there were no cars behind me, and turned onto the dirt road. That road has no lights, no reflectors, nothing. It's just your headlights, your memory, and the faint, pale strip of dust that counts as the path. On the sides, you've got a mix of low fields and these tired-looking trees that never grew quite straight. There's one old fence line near the beginning, and a crooked telephone pole I always used as a distance marker. Once I saw that pole, I knew it was about 4 miles to my driveway. About a mile in, the first weird thing happened. and it was small enough I almost ignored it. The radio cut to static for a second. Not a big dramatic thing, just a sharp burst of noise, then silence, then the show came back on like nothing happened. At the exact same time, the dashboard lights flickered once and got a little dimmer, not off, just slightly less bright. I frowned. But my first thought wasn't something paranormal. It was great. Now the electrical is going. Old car, lots of miles, bumpy dirt road. That kind of flicker isn't exactly shocking. I turned the radio down a notch and tapped the dash with my knuckles like that ever does anything. A couple minutes later, I felt the engine stumble a little. It's hard to explain if you've never had it happen, but it's like the car takes a breath wrong. The power drops for half a second, then catches again. You feel it more than you hear it. I told myself it was just the road jostling something. There are spots where the ruts are deep, and sometimes the suspension makes little noises. I tried not to think about how far I was from a tow truck. Worst case, I figured, I could park it, walk the last few miles home, and call in help in the morning. And then it died. Not dramatically, not some explosion under the hood, just this slow giving up. The engine coughed, lost power, came back for a moment when I feathered the gas, and then faded out completely. The steering went heavy. The dashboard lights dimmed and then settled into that weak state you get when the battery is doing all the work. I coasted to a stop right in the middle of the road, because there isn't really a shoulder, just a drop into grass and a shallow ditch. The car went quiet in a way that felt too loud, if that makes sense. No engine noise, no talk radio, nothing. Just the faint clicking from somewhere in the engine bay as metal cooled. I sat there for a second with my hands still on the wheel, just processing. My first real emotion wasn't fear. It was annoyance. I remember actually saying, "You've got to be kidding me," out loud. I tried the ignition. The engine tried to turn over, but it sounded weak, like it was too tired. No grinding, no obvious mechanical failure, and nothing catching. I tried again. Same thing. I didn't want to keep cranking and kill the battery completely, so I stopped. I checked my phone. 1 bar, maybe enough to send a text if I was lucky, but I doubted a tow truck would rush out at that hour, and even if they did, finding me on that road in the dark would be a pain. Walking home was not ideal, but it was possible. 4 miles on a road I knew well. I'd done longer walks. Before deciding anything, I figured I'd at least look under the hood like I knew what I was doing. I popped it from inside, then stepped out into the dark. When you turn your headlights off on a night like that, the darkness feels heavier. The only real light was from the dash and my phone screen. I flicked on the flashlight and lifted the hood. Now, I'm not a mechanic, but I know basic stuff. I checked the battery terminals to see if one had shaken loose. They were tight. I sniffed for anything that smelled burned. Nothing. No obvious leaks, no steam, no belt hanging off. The engine just sat there, a bunch of metal and plastic that a few minutes ago had been working fine. That's when I noticed the air felt... Still, it's subtle. One of those things you don't think about until it changes. No insects buzzing, no wind moving through the trees, no distant highway noise, just absolute quiet. And then, off down the road somewhere in front of me, I heard it. It was a sound I had trouble placing at first. Not quite voices, not quite animals. It was like a mix of whispering and clothes brushing against dry grass. Imagine someone wearing a heavy coat walking through tall weeds, but the sound is layered, like there's more than one, and slightly out of sync. That's the best way I can put it. I turned off my phone flashlight without even thinking. Instinct. My car had been dark for about 15 minutes by then, so unless someone had seen my headlights earlier, I was just another piece of shadow on the road. My brain went through options. Coyotes, maybe? But they usually yip or howl. They don't murmur cows. Some people keep cattle around there, but cows make cow sounds. This didn't sound like hooves either. It sounded deliberate, like a group of people walking together, except too heavy, too even, and they were getting closer. I don't scare easily out there. I've walked that road at night with just my phone screen for light. But something about the way that sound moved triggered a different part of my brain. I didn't want to be standing in the open next to a broken car when whoever or whatever that was came by. I shut the hood gently so it wouldn't slam, then moved off the road. There's a little dip on one side with some low bushes and scrub. I slid down into that and crouched behind a clump of branches. I wasn't fully hidden or anything, but it was better than standing in the headlights I didn't have. I forced myself to breathe slow. Heart was pounding. Every instinct said, run, but that felt stupid. There was nowhere to run that wouldn't put me right on the road with them. So I stayed down, knees in the dirt, hands resting on the cool, dusty ground. The sound kept advancing. Now that I wasn't moving, I could hear more detail. There were definitely multiple sources. It wasn't one thing shuffling along. It was several, maybe 6, maybe more. The footsteps, if that's what they were, didn't have a crisp heel-toe sound. It was more like weight shifting in pads or something soft. Every so often I'd hear a dry crack as something stepped on a twig. At one point, I heard something brush against the side of my car. The sound of fabric or fur sliding along metal, followed by the tiniest rattle from the side mirror. I wanted to look so badly. Just lift my head an inch, get a quick glimpse. My hands even twitched, like I was about to push myself up. But some part of me shut that down. If they were people, and they saw me hiding, that was trouble. If they weren't people, I didn't want to think too hard about that. The ground under my feet vibrated, very faintly, like a truck going past on a distant highway, except there was no engine noise, just that muted, heavy presence. They passed between my car and where I was hiding. I swear they were within 15 feet of me at one point. The whispering sound, if you can call it that, spiked slightly, like they were reacting to something. I held absolutely still. I even tried to slow my blinking because it felt too loud. Then, for a few seconds, everything stopped. No movement, no rustle. Just 4, maybe 5 slow, heavy breaths from somewhere above the level of the car roof. Not close enough that I could feel air on my skin, but close enough that the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. And then they moved on. The sound shifted, angling off the road and out into the field. Grass brushing, some low branches creaking as they were pushed aside. It got softer, then fainter, and finally blended back into the general silence of the night. I stayed crouched for at least another 5 minutes, maybe more. It felt like an hour. Eventually, my knees started to ache and reality crept back in. I was a grown adult squatting in a ditch because something moved past my car. Whatever it was gone. I climbed back up onto the road. My hands were shaking a little. I turned my phone screen on but kept it pointed at the ground just enough to see where I was stepping. The car looked the same. No smashed panels, no broken glass. I opened the driver door and sat inside with the door closed, just to have that thin shell around me. I tried the ignition again. Same weak turnover, no start. I laughed once in this short, humorless way and said, "Of course." I decided I wasn't walking all the way home in that direction. Not after that. Instead, I locked the car, stepped back out, and walked toward the highway. That way, at least I might catch a passing vehicle or get better reception. Nothing happened on that walk. No sounds, no lights in the field, nothing stepping out of the trees at me. Just dirt under my boots and the occasional rock trying to twist my ankle. Eventually, I got a clearer signal and called for a tow, then a friend from town who didn't mind picking me up. The next morning, the mechanic and I went back out with the tow truck. In daylight, everything looked boring. The car was sitting where I'd left it, a little dusty, but otherwise fine. He popped the hood, poked around for a bit, and said it was probably the fuel pump dying, old part, common failure. Nothing mysterious. While he worked, I walked around the car and glanced at the ground where those things had passed. The dirt and grass were disturbed, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't like hoof prints or boot prints. It was more like long, uneven smudges pressed into the soil, like someone had dragged a heavy bag in irregular steps. The grass in those smudges was bent and twisted, but not crushed flat, and the marks didn't have sharp edges. Deer, maybe, the mechanic said when I pointed them out. Or a herd of something. Hard to tell. He said it casually, like that explanation was enough. I didn't argue, but I'd heard deer before. I'd seen their tracks in that area. This wasn't that. After it happened, I told one neighbor. He just listened, nodded once, and said, "Best not to break down out there after dark." Like we were talking about rain. I can come up with explanations if I really want to sleep. Animals moving together, sound warped by fog, my nerves filling in the blanks. But that's not what it felt like. Out on that stretch of dirt, it doesn't feel like it's really my road. It feels like something else uses it, and I'm just borrowing it in the daytime. If you want to know what else moves around these back roads after dark, it's in the next story waiting on your screen. If you want more stories from out here, you can subscribe. And thank you for giving me the chance to tell you another one.